I always have a text in my hand, and then I get into this room and it all gets made useless. Because what I imagine at home in my head never quite fits the room. I want to thank Ed for the shakuhachi. Was that a Japanese flute? A very difficult instrument to play because you have to blow across it in an interesting way, which is how you get that wobbling sound and those overtones. And I thank him for the shakuhachi because it brought back a memory. The memory is of my former choir director when I served at church in Austin, Texas. He's Hispanic, but he has fondness for shakuhachis. And when I left that church for Brooklyn, New York, 1994, 20 years ago, he presented me with a shakuhachi, which is in my office now. But that reminded me in turn of the gentleman I'll be seeing in about 2 weeks on the 8th of February, if I'm not mistaken, Yoshihisa Alfred Tsuyuki, who was a classmate of mine at my seminary. And he comes from and serves what is called a Konko church, a form of Shinto. And if you ever want to know what my religion is, look that up. It's perfect for me. But I can't go to Japan, so I do what I can here. But you need to know about Alfred Yoshihisa, because when my wife and I were not married and we needed someone to do the ceremony, he did it. And every few years we get to visit with him, the person who performed the ceremony. So we were literally married by a Shinto priest. Didn't know that, did you? And that takes me to the other person I'll see in 2 weeks, the day after that, Thomas Reimer, who, when in my first semester of college, my advisor said, take a course that isn't in music. Get out there, learn some stuff. So I took a course in Asian studies, and Tom Reimer, who was a 32-year-old professor at the time, was teaching Asian studies. He's now 80, and I'm certainly not 18. And yet we've stayed in touch over the years. And he introduced me to the history of Japan, to the great poet Matsuo Basho, and to Yasunari Kawabata and Natsume Soseki, wonderful writers. So your flute contained all of that. And that really is germane to my sermon today, because what I'm going to talk about is spiritual fluency, the benchmark of growing your soul. For the last 2 Sundays, I've been talking about how we need to be religiously literate to be able to free our minds, which is to say, how can you make a good choice about what you believe if you don't know the beliefs that are out there, if you don't grasp the choices, if you're not informed. So you have to be religiously literate to be able to choose your beliefs. And what's more, liberal religion not only says you have the freedom to do it, you have the duty to do it. We expect you to do it. And if we don't help you do it, then we've fallen down on the job as clergy. Then last week I told you about, as we observed Martin Luther King's anniversary, about moral competence, that in order to change the world in a good way, we need to know right from wrong, good from bad, true from false. And most of us don't think about those things. We just kind of go with our gut, and sometimes our gut is dead wrong. That's why bad things happen. It's not because there's so many people twirling their mustaches and trying to do bad things. They honestly think what they're doing is the right thing, but then they turn out to be wrong because they haven't thought it through. They haven't asked themselves the repercussions of their emotions. They're not morally competent. And that's something you need to be. And our job is to help you get there. And this week I'm talking about spiritual fluency, which is the benchmark of growing your soul. In other words, and this is the hardest one to convey, is how do I know how to be present to myself in a way that gives meaning, well, to use the words of Duncan Littlefair, dignity, meaning, worth, and joy to all our days. What do I need to do? Do I just get it? Does it happen? Why don't I have it? And I think part of us is confused because we have the sense that spirituality, we all love the word spirituality, is something we should feel. You know, we see the Dalai Lama and he's always smiling. We think, I want to be like him. He's poised and serene, and he's like the top spiritual star in the world right now, and he's got those cool orange robes, and why can't I be more like that? I'm going to help you get over that right now with a story. A story comes out of the Hasidic tradition about Reb Zushia. Reb Zushia is a famous, well-known rabbi during the Hasidic 18th century. And the story is told of him that as he approached death, he began to tremble. And his students said, Reb Zushia, why are you trembling? He says, because I'm frightened. And the students said, well, what have you to be frightened of? You have lived a life worthy of Moses and Rachel. You have lived a life so exemplary that how could God deny you salvation? And Reb Zushia said, I know I have not lived as well as Moses, but I'm not Moses. So that's all right. I know I haven't lived as well as Rachel, so I'm not worried about that because I'm not Rachel. What I'm worried about is that I'll get to the throne of judgment and God will say, why were you not more like Reb Zushia? We can fall in love with models and exemplars, and we need teachers. Yeah, we do, and we need people to help guide us, Dalai Lamas, ministers, parents, teachers. But in the end, we're not supposed to be them. We're supposed to be us, right? The person you are. And most of us think we know who we are, but we're pretty sure we could be more or better or different. And then we look at the Dalai Lama and think, what do I have to do to get there? And so we think about spiritual practices. My colleague here and his marvelous spouse practice yoga. I don't bend that way, really. Which is not to say they're wrong or that I'm just saying that that's not my path. Well, maybe it will be, but it isn't now. We have a wonderful member of our choir and a couple of people who are very ardent practitioners of Tai Chi Chuan, which I did for a while and found but I didn't stick with it. Some of you keep journals maybe or meditate. You try to do something to kind of think about what you should be in the world. And these patterns, these activities, these are what we call spiritual practices. We call them spiritual because they're not really good for anything else. They don't make money. They don't clean your house. They don't change the world. They are self-culture. And of course, self-culture sounds kind of, what's the right word? Narcissistic. But in the liberal tradition, the idea that one should cultivate one's soul is a very old one. It goes back to my ancestor, my spiritual, not my personal ancestor, William Ellery Channing, who spoke of self-culture as being one of our jobs, to create a soul, to build it, to find it on purpose. In contrast to those traditions that say, when you join this tradition, you eat this food, wear these clothes, do this ritual, say these prayers. In the liberal tradition, we don't tell you what to do. And of course, you've all heard that, or maybe seen on Facebook, if you're a Facebook person, that said, this life is a test. It's only a test. If it were not a test, you would have been given clearer instructions on where to go and what to do. We didn't get instructions. We weren't told what to do. We're confused. That's why those other traditions can be very appealing. You know where to show up on Sunday or Friday or Saturday. You know what to say. You know the words. And in fact, you get to be pretty good at them too, and you can get a little bit of pride, spiritual pride. Why, I know the liturgy so well I can do it in my sleep. But here in this environment, and others like ours, we don't tell you what to say. We don't tell you what to think. We don't tell you what to do. And maybe you get the impression that it's okay to do anything. Wrong. You have to choose something. But anything is not a choice. You have to find the thing that does the following. And here's where I'm going to tell a little story from Teaching a Stone to Talk, a wonderful essay by Annie Dillard. Go home and find it and read it. It's one of the best essays that you'll ever read. And she talks about it, how she begins her essay with saying, on the island where I live with other cranks like me, There is a man named Larry who is teaching a stone to talk. Preposterous, I know. But he describes Larry as a man of some 30 years who keeps a stone under a piece of leather and periodically teaches it through some ritual action to say a word. Well, we know it's not going to happen. But she's impressed that he's adopted this ritual of engagement, that it's outlandish, it's impossible, it will not happen, but his devotion is remarkable to this impossible task. And she says, like any ritual, it involves meaningful effort. That's the one. It involves sacrifice. It involves self-suppression. That's a fancy term for it's not about you. And it involves a tilt of the will so that your work and the work you're doing become one. That's spirituality right there. Meaningful effort. That you intend to do it, that it's a part of how you live, it's presence that you bring, not habitual. You don't do it automatically, you do it on purpose. That it's a sacrifice. You could be doing something more fun. You could even be taking a nap. There are a lot of people who made that choice today. Self-suppression. This is hard for us because we're individualists. Shouldn't I be sort of becoming myself? Well, that's the hard part, is that to become a person is part of the job, but not the whole job. The other part is to become more than yourself. That is to say, to become a vehicle, a vessel, a conduit, a flute, the instrument through which the Spirit blows that makes the music. And finally, that alignment of the will. That's what makes you a flute. You can be an empty gourd, you can be an empty cup. You can just be empty, but you have to shape yourself into a flute for the wind to go through and make a noise. That's the tilting of the will part.